So discretionary effort as a motivator. There are two types of motivation. And there are tons of theories out there about motivation, how it happens, why it happens. But I want to give you just two easy examples to remember and think about. First of all, what is motivation? It is a motive. And at the root word of motivation is motive or reason or motion. So the reason why we move, if you can use that as a template for this conversation. So there are basically two types of motivation. There is constructive motivation and coercive motivation. Typically, coercive motivation is built on fears, lies, and violence, all right, or fear of violence. Coercive motivation basically tries to push people into doing things through manipulating them or some other ways. Coercive motivation is an external force making you do something that you do not want to do. Coercive motivation can also be referred to as negative peer pressure. I'm sure that as adults you've heard of children being exposed to peer pressure, but I would also like to say as adults we know that we also succumb to peer pressure. You'll hear people say, I'm just a social drinker, or I'm just a social smoker. Given certain situations, people will behave in specific kinds of ways. And so coercive motivation is basically a force that is external to you, pushing you towards something. And so here some tips or some guidelines to use in terms of understanding if you're being coerced into something. Here are three just easy or simple things to remember. First of all, if you feel like you are procrastinating, you are being coerced into doing something that you do not want to do. Secondly, if you're sloppy at doing what you're supposed to do, then you are being coerced into doing something that you do not want to do. Thirdly, if you're slow to make it happen, or you do it at its minimum, you have been coerced into doing something you don't want to do. And so it's important that we understand coercion, and coercion typically sounds like this: I have to. Very simple. If you hear yourself saying that, or you hear coworkers saying, I have to do this, or I have to do that, you know that they are being coerced, and you know that coercion is based on a lie. Because the truth of the matter is, you don't have to do anything. I often hear people say, well, I have to cook dinner for my family, or I have to change the baby's diaper. You don't have to do that. That's a lie. The diaper will fall off. Your family will starve. Right? And so coercive motivation typically compels us to do things because we're forced to doing it. And when we're forced to do something, we typically do not give it our best. All right? So that's coercive motivation. So Andre, what is in contrast to coercive motivation? And I would say that the contrast for coercive motivation is constructive motivation. Building on your goals and your desires. All right? When you move towards what you want based on your goals and your desires, I would say that you typically are full of energy, that you are engaged in the process, that you actually give it your best. And when there is not time, you actually find or create opportunities to make sure that thing happens when you're moving in your goal. Right? When you have constructive motivation, those are some of the things that you do to make sure that you're able to make those particular things happen. All right? When you are moving from constructive motivation, you say things differently and you have a different worldview than those who are being coerced into doing things. In constructive motivation, what you say or what gets said is, I like to and I love to do X, Y, and Z. In the case of being a high school teacher, it was very interesting to me to see parents moving from a coercive motivation and parents moving from constructive motivation. Because when it came time to pick up their students, the parents who were coercively motivated, who had to pick up their kids, were typically late. And you would hear them say, well, I had to do this and I had to do that because I had to come pick up my kid. And they were typically late. However, in contrast, the parents who love to or like to pick up their kids were typically there a little bit early, or they were there on time to make sure that their kids got home safely. All right? And so the constructive motivation, coercive motivation is extremely important in how we are able to give our discretionary effort. And so I would also like to offer this, that if we change the way we talk about things, we can actually change the center of our motivation. We can change it from coercive to constructive. For example, how many people have said this or heard someone say, I have to pay my bills? Now, what is that saying? That is saying that there is an external force that is making me do something that is against my will. And so typically what happens with people who have that mindset, they typically are late paying their bills. They typically can't find the bills, don't have stamps, don't know the account numbers of the electronic deposits, and all of these things. They have all of these excuses that keep them from fulfilling their requirement. But if we take that same example and we flip it on its head and we say, now this is going to be a mind trip, but I want you to think about the ramifications of living in a world and thinking like this, that I like to, love to pay my bills. I know, it's a mind trip. Who would say that to themselves? Guess who says that to themselves? People who pay their bills on time. People who understand that I purchased this thing. I made a contract to fulfill my word, and I'm going to fulfill that word. It's something that I want to do. I like having a house, so I'm going to pay my mortgage. I like having a car, so I'm going to make sure that gets paid. I like driving around town, so I'm going to make sure that I have car insurance. Those are the people who say those kinds of things. Can you imagine what your world would be like if you did the things that you like to do and love to do? Even if they were hard? Because those people who say, I like to pay my bills, what happens when they don't have the money for the bill? Do they wait for the bill collector to call them, or do they call the bill collector? Do you know how many times I've actually surprised or shocked a bill collector because I've called them to say, look, I'm short this month. I know you want $50. I can give you $30. Will that work? And typically, what does the bill collector say when I offer to give them less than what I owe? They typically say, well, do you have more? No, that's the first thing they say. The second thing that they end up saying is, okay, send it in. I'll take it. But if I'm operating from coercive motivation, I'm not calling that bill collector. As a matter of fact, I'm teaching my kids to lie. I'm telling them, kids, hey, tell the bill collector, Daddy's not home. And kids are like, Daddy say he's not home. Right? So coercive motivation, constructive motivation impacts directly discretionary effort. I'm Koen. I'll see you next chapter.